For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. Today we are going to be looking at 10 of the most bloodthirsty rulers of ancient history. So that means we'll be looking at the period before the year 600. I picked out the 10 that I think were the worst. At least that's how I feel this week. But I won't be listing them in any particular order because I don't feel comfortable ranking their crimes, if you know what I mean. And a caveat too, I'm well aware that some of what I'm about to say about these people comes from hearsay, or from the enemies of the person. And yes, we have to approach these reports with some skepticism. But I do want to share with you the stories because they are interesting and instructive. More on that at the end. So, the first one is Phalaris of Akragas. Akragas was a Greek colony on the southern coast of Sicily. The city still exists, but today it's called Agrigento. Phalaris ruled as a tyrant there in the first half of the 6th century BCE. You should know that the Greek word tyrannos, from which we get the word tyrant, just means a monarch, usually one who rose to power through popular support rather than by birth. But Phalaris appears to have been a tyrant also in the modern sense. During his rule, the domain of Akragas was greatly expanded, and he developed numerous public works. In the literary tradition, Phalaris is characterized as cruel, cunning, greedy, and needing an armed bodyguard to keep him protected. According to the ancient historian Diodorus Siculus, Phalaris was the first to use a particularly gruesome death machine called the Bronze Bull, which was life-size and hollow. The bronze worker who invented it, Perillus, told the tyrant, "If you ever wish to punish some man, Phalaris, shut him up within the bull and lay a fire beneath it. By his groanings the bull will be thought to bellow, and his cries of pain will give you pleasure as they come through the pipes in the nostrils." Phalaris then asked Perillus to get inside of the bull to show him how it worked, at which point he did, and Phalaris had him burnt inside the bull. Now, of course, Diodorus lived some 500 years after Phalaris, so the truth of this tale can be called into question. However, the poet Pindar, our earliest source on Phalaris, who lived only 100 years after the tyrant, says this in one of his odes. "But Phalaris, with his pitiless mind, who burned his victims in a bronze bull, is surrounded on all sides by a hateful reputation. Lyres that resound beneath the roof do not welcome him as a theme in gentle partnership with the voices of boys." It would seem that already by Pindar's time, Phalaris was infamous and known for the bronze bull. Our next one is King Joe of Shanghai. King Joe, also known as Joxin, was the last ruler of the Shang dynasty in China. He reigned in the 11th century BCE. Sometimes you'll hear him called by his posthumous name, Dixin, which is a pejorative. Keep in mind that in Chinese historiography, the last rulers of a dynasty were thought to be bad and worthy of being overthrown. So it is likely that later Chinese historians had an interest in making King Joe sound terrible. According to historiography, King Joe was overly fond of wine and women. He once attacked the small state of the Lord of Su, and in order to appease the king, the Lord of Su presented him with his daughter, Daji. King Joe was so enamored with Daji that he forgot all about governing so that he could fulfill her every desire. Also keep in mind that women are often blamed for the bad behavior of men in the ancient Chinese histories. It is said that she played frivolous music and engaged in inappropriate dancing. King Joe raised taxes to pay for all of his wife's luxuries. She had a wine pond and a meat forest. A large pool was constructed on the palace grounds and it was filled with alcohol. A small island was constructed in the middle of the pool where trees were planted which had branches made of roasted meat skewers hanging over the pool. And this allowed Joe and his friends to drift on canoes in the pool, and when they got thirsty, they reached down into the pool with their hands and drank the wine. When they got hungry, they reached up with their hands to eat the roasted meat. This was considered one of the most famous examples of decadence and corruption of a ruler in Chinese history. According to the ancient historian Sima Chen, King Zhou hosted festive orgies where many people engaged in immoral acts all at the same time with his concubines. He also created songs with crude lyrics and poor rhythm. King Zhou increased the use of corporal punishment. He invented the punishment of the burning pillar for society's delinquents. You seeing a trend here? In this punishment, a large hollow bronze cylinder was stuffed with burning charcoal and allowed to burn until red hot. Then prisoners were made to literally hug the cylinder, which resulted in a painful and unsightly death. Victims ranged from ordinary people and prisoners to high government officials. Some say that this was an invention of his consort, Daji, in order to satisfy her sadism. Some say Zhou and Daji got highly aroused after watching such torture. King Zhou could not stand any criticism. He once locked up the Earl of the West for this, only releasing him when the Earl presented him with women and beautiful horses. When the king's own older brother remonstrated against the cruel government, he was dismissed from his post. His uncle criticized him, and he had his heart cut out. When a rebel army defeated the Shang dynasty at the Battle of Muya, the king gathered all of his treasures around himself in the palace and then set fire to his palace and committed suicide. He became a negative exemplar of Confucian principles, presented as the quintessential wicked ruler. So, for that reason, it is hard to differentiate between history and legend when it comes to King Zhou. Next up is Caligula, the Roman emperor. In his will, Tiberius Caesar, the former emperor, had left his powers jointly to Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, that's Caligula, the son of the popular general Germanicus, and Tiberius Gemellus, Tiberius's grandson. Caligula's first act on becoming the emperor was to void Tiberius's will and have Gemellus executed. He was at first joyfully welcomed by the people, and he gave promise of a successful reign. He declared his intention of devoting himself to the public welfare. But the high hopes which were raised at his accession were soon dashed to the ground when it was discovered that the empire was in the hands of a man who appears to have lost his reason. The sources say he became cruel, sadistic, extravagant, and sexually perverted. And they present him as an insane tyrant. We don't know just how reliable these sources are, but we do know that during his brief reign, Caligula worked to increase the unconstrained personal power of the emperor. He began implementing very controversial policies that introduced religion into his political role by appearing in public dressed as various gods and demigods, such as Hercules, Mercury, Venus, and Apollo. Reportedly, he even began referring to himself as a god when meeting with politicians. Augustus Caesar had the public worship his spirit on occasion, but emperors generally shied away from this. Caligula just took things a step further, and he had people in Rome, including senators, worship him as a tangible, living god. He threatened to set up his own image in the temple at Jerusalem and to compel the Jews to worship him there. He wasted the money of the treasury on senseless projects, such as building a bridge from the Palatine Hill to the Capitoline Hill in Rome, saying that he wanted to live next door to Jupiter. Other stories about him may just be gossip, but it is possible they have some basis in fact. There's a story that he wanted to lead an expedition against Britain. He got all his soldiers to the seashore, and then maybe changed his mind, but he suddenly told them, collect all the seashells on the beach, and we'll take them back to Rome as spoils. And they did, and the Senate was ordered to put it into the treasury. He is accused of sleeping with other men's wives and bragging about it, killing people for mere amusement. Once, at some games at which he was presiding, he was said to order his guards to throw an entire section of the audience into the arena during intermission to be eaten by the wild beasts because there were no more prisoners to be used and he was getting kind of bored. The sources accuse Caligula of incest with his sisters, and they say he prostituted them to other men. Eventually, a successful assassination of Caligula was planned by officers within the Praetorian Guard. The plot is described as having been planned by 3 men, but many in the Senate and the army and the Equestrian Order were said to have been informed of it and involved in it. The next one up is Ashoka, the third ruler of the Mauryan Empire in India. He ruled from 268 to 232 BCE, nearly 37 years. I almost didn't include him because he had a change of heart during his reign and renounced his former ways. But he is pictured in the traditions as a cruel and violent emperor, so even though he redeemed himself in the end, I think he's worth mentioning. According to some traditions, there was a struggle for power among Ashoka and his brothers. Ashoka apparently killed 99 of his brothers and came to the throne. There was a territory called Kalinga in India, which was under the Nanda dynasty. Perhaps it became independent after the Nanda Empire fell. But in the 13th year of his rule, Ashoka conquered Kalinga. There was a lot of bloodshed, destruction, suffering, and sorrow caused by the conquering army. The state of Kalinga was very populous, but they say that 100,000 were killed and many more just died from the conditions. 150,000 were taken captive. The war marked a turning point in his life and also in the history of ancient India. It is almost impossible to come across a king in the pages of history of any country who felt such remorse, not when he was defeated, but when he won a great victory. And instead of celebrating the triumph, Ashoka expressed the most profound regrets and sorrow for having brought about a bloodbath. Shortly after the war was over, as the Buddhist tradition says, the monk Upagupta converted Ashoka to Buddhism. The story goes, and it does sound legendary, but it says that Ashoka was informed one day that a Buddhist prisoner who had been thrown into a large pot of boiling water in the prison that was called Ashoka's Hell, he refused to boil. The king was called down to view this miracle, and he saw that the prisoner had not been hurt. So he says, "This man has been unjustly arrested. Release him." And he had the jailer boiled instead. Well, he got converted to Buddhism by Upagupta, and he immediately sent a note of apology to Kalinga. "Sorry for all that I've done to you." He restored the lands that he had taken from various rebels, and he sent notes of apology to all of his former enemies. He ordered all the prisons demolished, and he set all the captives free, and he embraced the policy of ahimsa. Ahimsa is a term that means the avoidance of violence. It's a rule of conduct that bars the killing of or injuring of living beings. He was also an early animal rights activist. He exempted many types of animal from slaughter. We have to remember that it was in the interests of the later writers to show a very dramatic transition from the earlier Ashoka to the later Ashoka to demonstrate what Buddhism did for him. So it is likely that the cruelty was exaggerated to some extent, but that's the story. Next up is a Persian emperor. His name was Kabugia, but we call him in English Cambyses II. He was the son of Cyrus the Great. He invaded Egypt, and he successfully overthrew the native Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik III, the last ruler of Egypt's 26th dynasty. And he became the first ruler of Egypt's 27th dynasty. We know very little about Cambyses through contemporary texts, but his reputation as a mad, tyrannical despot has come down to us in the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus. He lived in the 5th century BCE, and a Jewish document from the 5th century BCE known as the Demotic Chronicle, which speaks of the king destroying all the temples of the Egyptian gods. We are told that he personally led a campaign up the Nile River into Ethiopia looking for the source of the Nile, and it was a disaster. His ill-prepared mercenary army was so meagerly supplied that they were forced, because they ran out of food, to eat the flesh of their own colleagues when their supplies ran out. The Persian army came back north in humiliation, having failed to even encounter an enemy in battle. And then, of course, there is the mystery of the lost army. Some 50,000 men he sent into the western desert of Egypt to look for the Siwa oasis, which they wanted to attack, because there was a town there. And they were never heard from again. Apparently the Egyptian guides must have misled them in the desert on purpose, After learning of this loss, he was so upset that he is said to have stabbed the sacred Apis bull in Memphis to death in a ceremony because he thought the people were mocking him. And so he killed the sacred bull. Now, it seems that he must have regretted this later because the bull was buried with due reverence after that. Herodotus tells us also that he deliberately desecrated and burned the embalmed body of the earlier pharaoh Amasis. He says, when Cambyses had entered the palace of Amasis, he gave command to take the corpse of Amasis out of his burial place. When this had been done, he ordered his courtiers to scourge it and pluck out the hair and stab it and to dishonor it in every other possible way. When they had done this too, they were wearied out, for the corpse was embalmed and held out against the violence and did not fall to pieces. Cambyses gave command to consume it with fire, a thing that was not permitted by his own religion. Now, that being said, the Egyptian evidence that we have depicts Cambyses as a ruler that wanted to avoid offending the Egyptians, and that he presented himself as an Egyptian king, as in all respects, as he should. According to Herodotus, Cambyses supposedly married 2 of his sisters. He killed one of them in anger when she said something he didn't like. One version says she was pregnant at the time. Herodotus also says that once Cambyses asked one of his advisors what the people think of him. The advisor said that the people love him, but that he drinks too much wine. Cambyses got angry at this and picked up a bow and aimed an arrow at the advisor's little boy who was standing in the vestibule. And he said, "If I shoot and hit your son in the middle of his heart, then that will prove the people are wrong." And he shot and killed the boy dead. Modern Egyptologists believe that many of these accounts are rather biased and that Cambyses' rule was maybe not quite so traumatic as Herodotus indicates. The Greeks didn't like the Persians, but Herodotus speaks more ill of Cambyses than any of the other Persian rulers. It may indeed be that Cambyses' rule began well enough, but with his defeats and losses and his mood getting worse because of that, that maybe it caused him to turn darker with time, along with his actions. We're told that when the Persians at home received news of Cambyses' military disasters, some of the most influential nobles revolted, swearing allegiance to the king's younger brother. And the story goes that on hearing of this revolt and in a hurry to get on his horse to head back home, Cambyses managed to stab himself in the thigh with his own dagger. He ignored it, the wound became full of gangrene, and the king died. And that was in August of 522 BCE. The next tyrant I want to talk about is Qin Shi Huang from the Qin dynasty in China. In 361 BCE, there were a half dozen or so powerful states in China. There was the Chu, the Jin, the Yan, the Han, the Qi, the Zhao, and the Zhou. And then there was the state of Qin, which was mostly ignored by the others because they thought of it as a barbarian country. But the Qin began the slow process of conquering one city at a time, one territory at a time, one state at a time. It grew gradually and became more powerful. Now, Zhao Zheng, the fellow that we're talking about, was only 13 years old when he became king of the Qin state in 246 BCE. For the first few years, his chief ministers were making all the decisions because he was just a kid. In 241, 5 of the states joined together in attacking Qin, but they were defeated. Now, this is where the king's most trusted advisor, Li Si, comes into the picture. According to the ancient Chinese historian Sima Chen, Li Si said to the emperor, "With the power that Qin possesses and your majesty's worth, it would be easy to wipe out the feudal lords, found an imperial dynasty, and unite the whole world under one rule, as it would be to dust off the top of an oven." And over the next dozen years or so, Zheng conquered the other states. He took the title at that time Huangdi, or August Emperor. And Shi means first. Shi Huangdi, the first August Emperor. Now that Qin Shi Huangdi was emperor, he went about securing the country and unifying it. He standardized the weights and the measurements. He standardized the gauge of the wheeled vehicles. The writing system was also standardized. A standard coin also began circulating at the time. Now let me tell you a little bit about Chinese legalism. Legalism was a political philosophy of the time that was becoming popular and it was employed by the Qin state. The main philosopher of this way of thinking was Han Feizi. He brought together several different schools of thought in order to come up with this philosophical system. According to legalism, the ruler must have all power and authority. They have to have a complete monopoly, and they have to keep it away from everybody else. And that power must be awe-inspiring. And the whole state must be founded on the law. And the law, which has rewards and punishments in it, must be applied equally to all people. Okay, no favoritism, no classes or anything like that. Everybody's the same. Now you might think that sounds really good. Well, let's see how this was employed. Li Si, who was Qin Shi Huang's advisor, he believed all of this, okay? And many of the laws and edicts passed under legalism were designed to make the common people ignorant and weak. Now this seems contrary to any kind of logical sense, but it did work for a while. His point of view was that human nature was evil, therefore the laws need to restrain them. That's their purpose. You've got to keep the people in order. But another principle of legalism was that the laws needed to be harsh. The punishments for the laws needed to be harsh. You have to punish people severely in order to keep them in line. And that's what was done during the reign of Qin Shi Huang. Now, besides all this, the emperor is said to have started behaving in irrational ways. Keep in mind that we hear about some of this stuff from the succeeding Han dynasty, which did have a vested interest in making him look bad. But we're told that he became obsessed with living forever. He hated if anyone mentioned anything about his death. He sent his ministers to the four corners of the empire to discover the secrets of immortality. He had alchemists that were telling him, "Here, drink this, sire. This will make you immortal." They had all these kinds of potions and concoctions, which contained an element that they believed, could confer immortality, mercury. And he's down in this every day, What do you think that's going to do to someone like that? Well, it's not only going to shorten their life instead of extending it, but it also made him a little woohoo, right? The emperor also began several monumental architectural projects which required hundreds of thousands of workers, many of whom died due to the harsh labor. He constructed an early version of the Great Wall of China to keep the northern barbarians out. He ordered a new palace to be built for himself at Epang. He had a huge mausoleum, you're probably familiar with that, constructed for himself at Mount Li. That's where the tomb of the first emperor is. You can go visit it today. On his death, Prince Huai sent all of the emperor's concubines who were without children to follow him in death. And he had all the workers on the tomb executed so they wouldn't reveal its secrets or its location. But there's one act committed by the first emperor for which he's reviled more than any other, and that is oppression of opposing schools of thought was considered very important in legalism, and Li Si recommended to him to burn all books. Education was considered bad by the Qin state in the legalist system. So you have to get rid of the things that are going to educate people, and that would be books, okay? So just thousands and thousands of books were destroyed, burnt during this period. Now, enough copies of the Confucian classics have survived so that they can be read today, but there are many works that were probably lost to us forever because of Qin Shi Huang's book burning. And ever since the empire's collapse, this dynasty has been synonymous with tyranny and oppression. Next up is an Assyrian king. I could talk about a number of kings of Assyria during the period of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, because the tactics they often employed, which were intended to inspire fear, were part of accepted practice at the time, in their culture. But I chose one, and that is Ashur-nasir-pal II, who ruled from 883 to 859 BCE. His conquests are generally accepted as the real beginning of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Unlike many of the others that I considered on this list, we have first-hand accounts of some of the things that he did from him. This king undertook several military campaigns against small states in the mountains north of Assyria, forcing them to become vassals. He also extended Assyrian power to the east, and fearing the growing Assyrian might, the Aramean state of Bit Adini on the middle Euphrates River encouraged some Assyrian vassals to revolt against him. Ashur-nasir-pal quickly crushed the revolts, And he writes of his victories. Now, one here is interesting. This is his victory over Ahia Baba, who had taken over the city of Suru, which had been under Assyrian control. And he says, a bit of a trigger warning here, this gets gruesome. I built a pillar over against his city gate, and I flayed, that means skinned, all the chief men who had revolted. And I covered the pillar with their skins. Some I walled up within the pillar. Some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes. Others I bound to stakes round about the pillar. Many within the border of my own land I flayed, and I spread their skins upon the walls, and I cut off the limbs of the officers, of the royal officers who had rebelled. Ahia Baba I took to Nineveh. I flayed him. I spread his skin upon the wall of Nineveh. Yeah. By the way, the flaying was done while the people were still alive. In his account of his defeat of the city of Tila, he says as follows, with battle and slaughter I stormed the city and captured it. 3,000 of their warriors I put to the sword. Their spoil and their possessions, their cattle and their sheep I carried off. Many captives from among them I burned with fire, and many I took as living captives. From some I cut off their hands and their fingers. From others I cut off their noses, their ears, and their fingers. Of many I put out the eyes. I made one pillar of the living and another of heads, and I bound their heads to posts round about the city. Their young men and maidens I burned in the fire. The city I destroyed, I devastated, I burned it with fire and consumed it. Yeah, there is no embellishment of later writers here who wanted to make him look bad. This is right from the man. Now, he himself may be embellishing a bit because this could have been a way kings flexed, but I expect that much of this is true because the whole point of this savage treatment was to prevent future rebellions, and doing this was viewed as an effective deterrent. His accounts of his military campaigns are full of this stuff. The results of Ashurnasirpal's campaigns provided a very strong motive for later Assyrian expansion. The vast amount of booty and captive labor he brought back to Assyria allowed him to construct a new capital city, Kalhu, Nimrud today. The walls of Ashurnasirpal's new royal palace were decorated with frescoes and carved stone slabs and beautiful relief scenes, cuneiform inscriptions, and maybe you have seen some of this stuff before. You know, the Ptolemies of Egypt are an interesting dynasty, full of intrigue. And I chose one of them for my next tyrant, Ptolemy VIII, Euergetes II. He's called that because he was the 8th Ptolemy, but only the 2nd Euergetes. His father was Ptolemy V. Okay? Now, Ptolemy V had, by his wife, Cleopatra I, 2 sons and a daughter. The elder of the 2 boys became Ptolemy VI. And he took the crown of Egypt after his father's death, and he married his sister, another Cleopatra, Cleopatra II. And he took as their co-regent his younger brother Ptolemy VIII. This is the fellow we're talking about. Now, Antiochus IV of the Seleucid Empire invaded Egypt in the spring of 169 BCE and wiped out the Egyptian expeditionary forces, captured the fortress of Pelusium, and apparently also Ptolemy VI, who, by the way, happened to be his nephew. Ptolemy VI negotiated with Antiochus, but in Alexandria, Egypt, these events sparked off riots. Antiochus's troops had been looting the temples there, and so the Alexandrians decided to wash their hands of Ptolemy VI, and they proclaimed Ptolemy VIII joint ruler with his sister Cleopatra II, Ptolemy VI's wife. Antiochus then apparently made a half-hearted attempt to besiege Alexandria, but he withdrew. Now, Egypt had a curious problem, there being 2 Ptolemy brothers, and both had been declared rulers of Egypt. So, after an intervention by the Romans, it was decided that Ptolemy VI was going to share the kingdom with his brother Ptolemy VIII. Ptolemy VI would rule from the old Egyptian capital of Memphis, and his younger brother Ptolemy VIII would rule in Alexandria, along with their sister, who was the other brother's wife. Yeah. Okay. Now, for a short time, the 2 brothers and their sister are all ruling Egypt, but it wasn't a good situation, and eventually their reconciliation began to fall apart. On one hand, you have Ptolemy VI, who shows himself to be a very clever, civilized, and energetic ruler. But his brother was the opposite. Now, envoys from Alexandria came to Ptolemy VI, and they said, your younger brother's rule is just becoming intolerable. We can't stand it anymore. You've got to come back. And this kind of dictated what happened next. It's now May of 163 BCE, and the two brothers got together and they agreed on a partition. Now, this ended up being better for Ptolemy VI. He got to take Egypt, and all his brother got was the province of Cyrenaica, which is kind of in Libya. There was a battle in 145 BCE, however, where Ptolemy VI was wounded, and he eventually died a couple days later. Now, this left his widow, Cleopatra II, in Alexandria, and she had a little boy who ended up becoming Ptolemy VII. Okay? He was nominally Egypt's king because he was the son of Ptolemy VI. Okay? But he's under his mother's protection. Now, Ptolemy VII, the little boy's army, consisted mostly of mercenaries at this point, and they had gone to Syria to join up with the then king of the Seleucid Empire. And Ptolemy VIII saw this as his chance, okay? So he came after the boy and his mom. So Cleopatra was forced to make a deal with Ptolemy VIII. So she says, okay, let's get married, and you and I will rule, okay? But Ptolemy VII, my boy, okay, he's going to become of age, and then he's going to be the king. And Ptolemy VIII said, okay. At this point, he officially becomes Ptolemy VIII, Euergetes II. He was also known as Physcon, but that was a nickname that other people gave him who didn't like him. It means fatso. He was, one of the writers says, through indulgence in luxury, his body had become corrupted with fat, and with a belly to measure it with one's arm. He was not liked, but anyway, his reign has been referred to as a disaster in every way. And he's called a tyrant in many sources. He's called repulsive in many sources. People hated him. Now, he and Cleopatra II have a son. And as soon as that happened, he killed Ptolemy VII, his stepson. He's out of the way. Then Ptolemy VIII becomes captivated by his niece, Cleopatra III, who was the daughter of Cleopatra II. And this niece agreed to a liaison with him as long as she could also become queen along with her mother, which he made happen, and now you've got two queens, Cleopatra II and Cleopatra III, mother and daughter, both of whom he's sleeping with. Okay? Now this situation infuriated Cleopatra II, but, she already had her son murdered by him, but she really can't do much about it. She, however, is greatly loved by the people of Egypt. He had tried to gain the goodwill of the Egyptian people and the priesthood by doing all kinds of things, signing amnesty decrees, but he had done other things like brutally attacking the Jews in Egypt and the Greek intelligentsia in Alexandria, even expelling some from the country. Public resentment against him grew to such a point that he finally fled to the island of Cyprus, taking along with him Cleopatra III, their two children, and Memphites, his son by Cleopatra II. Well, it wasn't a moment too soon, because as soon as he left, the mob broke into his palace looking for his blood, but he wasn't there. Now, he's fuming there in Cyprus, and he wanted to get back to Egypt and oust his sister wife, Cleopatra II. Okay? She was reigning there now. But so demented was he that in a fit of maniacal revenge against his sister and against the Alexandrian mob, which was destroying his statues in Alexandria, he killed his own son, Memphites, because it was Cleopatra II's son. Okay? And he sent his dismembered body to her as a birthday present. Now, in 129 BCE, he was strong enough to invade Egypt, and there was a civil war, Cleopatra's forces against his forces, and he was victorious. She had to flee. And after that, he took revenge on the city with a bloody purge. And he reigned there until the end of his life. Okay, this one you may have been expecting me to include, and that is the Emperor Nero. Yes, the final emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty of the Roman Empire. The first 5 years of his reign, so the sources say, were marked by a wise and beneficent administration, but matters changed after that. It is said that Nero was controlled by his ambitious and unscrupulous mother, Agrippina. She even tried to displace Nero at one point to elevate Britannicus, his stepbrother, to the throne. Britannicus dropped dead one day at dinner. Poison. Seems clear who was behind it. Nero was determined to break free of his mother by whatever means necessary, so he had her cut down by a palace hit squad. The whole story was widely embellished later on, including a tale about his first attempt to kill her by staging an accident in a collapsible boat, and how this failed because she was a good swimmer. After his mother's death, he is said to have yielded himself to the influence of the infamous Poppaea Sabina, the most beautiful and the most wicked woman of Rome. To be with her, he murdered his first wife, Octavia, the Emperor Claudius's daughter. It is alleged Poppaea was sent Octavia's severed head as a wedding present. Some of these themes seem to be reappearing, right? Anyway, she didn't survive very long either. Nero was rumored to have kicked her in the stomach while she was pregnant with their second child, and she died shortly thereafter. They say he followed a career of wickedness, extortion, and atrocious cruelty. But of course, the stories become more exaggerated over time. As you may know, in the 10th year of his reign, 64 CE, there occurred a great fire which destroyed a large part of the city of Rome. Many ancient temples and public buildings were consumed. The reports of the conduct of Nero during this great disaster are very diverse. Some represent him as gloating over the destruction of the city and repeating his own poem on the sack of Troy. Other reports declare that he never showed himself in a more favorable light, exerting himself to put out the flames, opening the public buildings and the imperial palace for the shelter of the homeless, and relieving the suffering by reducing the price of grain. But others charge that if he performed these charities, it was to relieve himself of the suspicion of having caused the fire. Yeah. I should add that there's no evidence at all that he torched the city in order to build a new palace, but those were the rumors going around. But the burning of Rome did result in the rebuilding of the city on a more magnificent scale. Now, one thing that is true is that in order to shield himself from the suspicion of causing the fire, Nero accused the Christians of the city of doing it, and they became victims of his cruelty. This is what the first century historian Tacitus says. In order to drown the rumor, Nero shifted the guilt on persons hated for their abominations and known as Christians, and punished them with exquisite tortures. Those who confessed their creed were first arrested, and then by their information, a large number were convicted, not so much on the charge of burning the city, as of hating the human race. In their deaths, they were made the subject of sport, for they were covered with the skins of wild beasts, worried to death by dogs, nailed to crosses, burned to serve for torches in the night. Nero offered his own gardens for this spectacle. The people were moved with pity for the sufferers, for it was felt that they were suffering to gratify Nero's cruelty, not from considerations for the public welfare. In spite of the practices of Nero, the larger part of the empire was beyond the circle of his immediate influence. People tolerated his conduct on the ground that a bad ruler was better than no emperor at all. But his enemies in the government finally had had enough. The armies had turned against him, and he was deserted by the senior palace officials. By June of 68, the Senate voted Galba the new emperor and declared Nero a public enemy. The Praetorian Guard was bribed to betray him. They captured him, and he reportedly committed suicide before they could dispatch him. Sharmin lived during the 16 Kingdoms period in China during the 4th century CE. He was a general under Shi Huang, emperor of the later Zhao Kingdom, and at that time was known as Sharmin because his father had been adopted by the emperor. For his accomplishments, Sharmin was created the Duke of Wuxing. He served under several of the Shi emperors. The Shi, by the way, the rulers of the later Zhao dynasty, were ethnically Jie, one of the tribes of northern China. They were considered by the Han Chinese as being one of the 5 barbarian groups at that time. Sharmin was Han Chinese. His relations with the Shi family were strained, and it soon resulted in the emperor, Shi Huang, seeking to kill him. But Sharmin defeated his forces in battle and captured the emperor. He was kept under house arrest with no outside communication. Sharmin decided that he needed to disarm the Jie people, so he commanded that all non-Chinese not be allowed to carry arms. He then went further and ordered that any Chinese man who killed one barbarian and brought his head to Sharmin would be promoted in rank by 3 degrees. And if he was a military officer, he would be transferred into supreme command. Sharmin then committed one of the most terrible massacres in all of history. He ordered the death of all barbarians without regard for sex or age in the territory he controlled. Over 200,000 people were killed. Among the people who died were ethnic Chinese who happened to have high, larger noses, deep-set eyes, and thick, full beards, which in combination were considered to be the indicators of not being Han Chinese. The forces of the emperor, Shi Huang, made one last attempt to defeat Sharmin, but they failed, and Shi Huang was assassinated. Sharmin, restoring his father's original name of Zhan, became Zhanmin, then took the throne as the emperor of a new state called Zhanwei. This new state lasted for only 2 years, from 350 to 352 CE. Zhanmin's brief reign was characterized by rash decisions and massive executions. He would often react violently to advisors who suggested ideas different from his own, including killing them, and then regret those violent reactions after he realized that he was wrong. In 352, in a battle with the forces of the former Yan, another state of this period, Zhanmin and his Chinese army were tricked into the open field and then surrounded. His horse was killed, and he fell to the ground and was captured. It is said that he was whipped 300 times and then executed. And that is the story of Zhanmin. The reigns of these men show to us the perils inherent in a despotic form of government that permits anyone, no matter how ill-suited, to rule a powerful state. I mean, if they have the right lineage or command of an army, they could grab hold of absolute power. Yeah, a head of state with such power can accomplish more in a short period of time. They can get good things done without a lot of red tape. Progress can be made faster. But who do they answer to? Many of these ancient empires had no provision by which any ruler could be held responsible, either to law or to reason. A cruel tyrant could revel in blood, or a maniac could indulge in the wildest excesses without restraint. The only limit to such despotism was assassination, because there was no legal recourse. Another thing we learn from these stories is how the ancients talked about their past rulers. They were considered object lessons, and that is why the reigns of terrible monarchs were made more terrible with embellished stories. They were warnings of what could happen. They were moral lessons. They were propaganda for current regimes who wanted to make previous regimes look illegitimate. In all of this, we can learn something, not only of ancient forms of government, but of ancient values. If you think I left somebody important out and they ruled before the year 600, please let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Browse around. There are all kinds of ancient history videos here. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so for as little as $2 per month at patreon.com/World of Antiquity. You might like my little e-booklet, Why Ancient History Matters. It's designed to persuade people that the subject is important, even in the modern world. You might also wish to use it to help spread the word, so feel free to share it with someone you know. It's free for anyone who wants it. I've left a link in the description box below the video for you to grab a copy. Catch you later.